Hello and welcome to today's episode of the On the Up podcast brought to you from Moneypenny. My name's Dan Marshall and today I'm joined by Ian Leadbetter from Ruler Analytics to talk about understanding the power of your marketing. Ian's a co-founder and director at Ruler, a leading tracking, attribution and marketing mix modeling tool. Ruler's platform allows businesses to track the impact of their marketing investment and close the loop between marketing spend and revenue. Ian, thanks so much for taking time to join us today. Really privileged to have you here.
Thank you.
Wondered, Ian, if we could start by just having a little bit of a chat about what Ruler is and how you guys offer value to businesses.
You gave us quite a good intro there, really. But yeah, Ruler Analytics is a marketing distribution platform primarily used to evidence effectiveness of marketing channels and measure ROI.
Excellent. And what's been kind of Ruler's journey to this point? Did you always start off doing that, or have you evolved a bit over time?
Yeah, we started off working in digital marketing and basically saw a few gaps in terms of measurement. So little things really like telephone calls weren't being tracked, and we were driving leads to websites, but we didn't know what the actual outcome of that inquiry or lead was to revenue. So just using Google Analytics just didn't quite feel like we had enough insight. So we started to build our own tools around the edge of it to help us to measure those campaigns more effectively, and that just evolved over time. So we got great feedback from the clients we were working with, and then it evolved into a full-scale solution and eventually raised venture capital, and here we are now.
Excellent. And obviously you mentioned call tracking. I think that was one of the first things we started working on together, and then I guess with that evolution, some of the things that you guys are doing now and are generally, I think, bigger topics in marketing right now as well, like multi-touch attribution, marketing mix modeling, etc. They are getting more popular. I think there is still a bit of uncertainty around them for some people. So I wonder if we just kind of cover off what is multi-touch attribution.
Yeah, so I guess there's been a lot of changes in the industry, over the last 10 years, primarily, going back 10 years or so. Most people would probably just be running Google ads, and then Facebook ads became more prevalent. Obviously, there's lots of different campaign types. You've kind of got remarketing campaigns, search campaigns, etc. And basically, the industry's evolved towards people coming through lots of different touch points. So they may have seen your ad on Facebook, they may have come back through Google Organic, they may have researched you on a listing site or Reddit or something, and eventually inquire. And basically, what we do is look at all the different touch points on a customer's journey to conversion. And that in a nutshell is multi-touch attribution. There's different attribution models which give you different weightings. That'll tell you, there's first click to look at the first touch, last click to look at the last touch, and then there's various other models that'll look at different weightings that allocate credit accordingly across the customer journey. And then obviously subsequently from a conversion onto revenue.
And as I said, there seems to have been this rise in awareness of MTA and people are talking about it more. Do you think there's anything specifically that's driven that in recent times?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the explosion of channels. So as I mentioned just now, primarily did start off with just search, then more social. Now we've seen things like TikTok and Pinterest and LinkedIn being sort of big drivers at the top of funnel. There's obviously been big changes in privacy recently. So third-party cookies being blocked by Apple, iOS 14.5. Google Chrome was going to block them this year. And the problem that causes is that your ad platform can no longer see if there's an impression, which is somebody who saw your ad subsequently converted on your website. So that disconnect that now exists has caused massive issues for people who are using particularly paid social or other kind of awareness-based channels to drive conversions. And obviously they're exploring different solutions to solve that problem. Guess the other thing is your GA4 coming out last year. Big changes compared to the previous version, Universal Analytics or GA3. So we saw enormous sort of shift in data availability there. So you have like 25% difference between the original platform and the new one. And obviously that doesn't have things like access to impressions, doesn't have access to ad platform. It costs, for the likes of TikTok and Pinterest and LinkedIn. So it only has a partial view of what's going on. So I think GA4 in combination with third-party cookie deprecation has definitely led to people exploring different options in terms of how they can measure their marketing.
Yeah, I think those two things have been probably some of the bigger challenges for marketers
Yeah.
generally, really, over the last few years, haven't they? I think I'm yet to meet anybody that says hugely positive things about GA4. I think everyone's just a little bit scared of cookies as well, aren't they? So big factors there. Well, one of the things I always think of as well, that I think I've noticed this in my own experience in recent years as well, is that kind of that desire to like prove the investment of marketing a lot more, but prove it for yourselves, but also maybe being held accountable for that a bit more as well. I think in some businesses where you know they're happy to invest in marketing, but they want to understand how that's performing, and different attribution tools obviously are a good way of showing the value in your different channels. You mentioned lots of different ones there as well before that
Yeah.
you can kind of cover off as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest driver we see is evidencing effectiveness. People are trying to get to that sort of P&L level of we invested this and this was the output. But obviously, you have to do that in order to see what's working and what's not working, in order to optimize, to cut out waste, and to plan budget accordingly. So it is sort of it's a vital step in the process. But obviously, the evidence and the effectiveness in the first point is the first sort of port of call, really.
And one of the things that we kind of also reference is that with that growth in interest in attribution, there's also been a rise in platforms like Ruler. So the kind of, I guess, competitive sphere for you guys has probably evolved quite a lot and quite quickly in recent times. How do you guys kind of differentiate in that market right now?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've always kind of solve problems that Google Analytics, for instance, couldn't solve. That was kind of how we started out, as I mentioned earlier, around those gaps we saw. So things like call tracking, live chat tracking, first party tracking to match individual visitors to offline sales and sending offline revenue back to ad platforms were all kind of areas that Google Analytics didn't really help with, really. So we've always kind of tried to solve problems that the sort of core platforms didn't solve. Obviously, the changes we've mentioned have driven interest in these platforms more recently. So our biggest point of differentiation is kind of two core approaches now. First party multi-touch attribution for granular sort of click tracking, and marketing mix modeling for a more holistic top of funnel view of marketing impact on revenue. Where we're a little bit different is we do use both of those two methodologies, and we combine them together. So we have what we call a data-driven and impression attribution model. So you've got the best of the granularity of a data-driven model. And we've also got the weightings from marketing mix modeling that allow us to simulate where we think impressions came in the route to conversion.
And I guess both of those things combined to a business, from a business's perspective, is all about helping them evidence the impact, as you said before, and the effectiveness of those channels. What do you guys typically find kind of businesses are doing in this sense at the moment? Are people already kind of experienced with different MMMs or MTA models when they come to you, or are you kind of advising them and sort of taking them on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of flux in the market based on people sort of still figuring out whether a GA4 is, fit for purpose for them. There's definitely been a bit of consolidation and consensus around the methodology we're employing. So, for instance, Google released a white paper earlier in the year called what was it now? It was the Modern Marketing Measurement Playbook. That kind of talked about this methodology of using MTA for tracking clicks, MMM for modeling impressions and offline, and then incrementality testing for validating and calibrating your models. So there's definitely some consensus there and sort of measurement community. In terms of actual clients, it's definitely something we're kind of helping to educate on. Most marketers that come to us would probably not have heard of MMM unless they were already running or experienced in running offline or maybe TV and radio. They might have used MMM before, but they've probably not used it in conjunction with digital quite so much. So there's definitely a bit of a education gap, I guess, at the moment as the market evolves.
And with those businesses then you're talking to, I think sometimes there's a preconception maybe around MMM that it's for really big businesses. You obviously mentioned kind of TV and radio there, which you typically associate with big brands, big budgets, etc. But it feels like we're almost kind of moving away from that a little bit, and it's now accessible to more businesses.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of it traditionally it's been used by bigger businesses for as it'd be like a big annual project. So they'd use it to look at the last 5 years and last year in particular, and then use that then to do their forecasting and budgeting for the next year. And it would look at all of their different offline channels like TV, radio, at home, as well as digital. And it might be ran by an agency and delivered with a lot more sort of additional insight, analysis of the data, and it would come in a hefty sort of pack and presentation. Whereas we're basically using the same methodology, but iterating on it quicker. So using a linear regression model for primarily digital channels with some offline and refreshing it once a month or once a quarter, depending on the amount of data you have. And then that gives you, a model which gives you what we think the impact of those channels was. And then we can apply that to the digital data. So in summary, we're using the same kind of traditional method in terms of a linear regression model, but we'll make it accessible for smaller businesses by running it on a higher frequency, so maybe every month or every quarter, depending on the amount of data they have. And yeah, using the weightings that come from that to apply it to the DDA model.
Excellent. That sounds good. And what would you say are the kind of like the main sort of values that the business gets from that then?
Yeah, so I guess if you compare the two methodologies, multi-touch attribution is just purely click-based attribution. So it'll only measure what it sees in terms of, we call it deterministic. So it only tracks the specific clicks on the route on the path to conversion. Whereas marketing mix modeling, because it's more of a holistic take on the same data set, the advantages of it are you can have a historical view, so we can go back in time for, we like to go back at least 2 years to build some back data. But you can also, one of the outputs is a diminishing returns curve or a saturation curve. So that shows you the amount of headroom we think is in that channel, but also that allows us to then forecast forward. So we'll often use the last 8 weeks of data to say, what does the next quarter or the next year look like? And obviously that's kind of predictive analytics at that point. It allows us to estimate what we think the returns would be if you invested further in a particular channel.
So I guess a business could then, or they're almost using the MTA to look at the value of what they've done, and then combining that with the MMM is going to allow them to forecast and plan more efficiently for the future as well, I suppose.
Yeah. So generally speaking, you'd use MTA for your kind of day-to-day evidence and effectiveness and campaign optimization, because you have that level of granularity. On the MMM side, it'd be more for that kind of holistic view, which would include offline, TV, radio, or upper funnel channels. It's given a fairer weighting to that. But we've also got that historical look back and forward-looking forecast. So MTA will only work from when the tag's deployed on your website, whereas MMM can go back effectively as far as you have data. So two different methodologies looking at the same data sets effectively. Two slightly different views, and obviously we then blend those together to kind of give you the best of that granularity and holistic view.
Sounds good. And then I guess there's a lot of work that needs to be done around the implementation of some of this as well. Could you speak to that from both the sort of MTA and the MMM angle?
Yeah, so we're a software solution, so we have kind of all, the platform built, the APIs built for ingestion of data. Obviously, it kind of depends really on what the client's internal data looks like, really. So from an MTA perspective, we'll drop a tag on the website, that'll track each individual user's customer journey, touch points, click IDs, cookie IDs, UTM sources, whatever it happens to be. And then we'll also capture forms, live chat, we can track phone calls. So that kind of gives us that sort of first party data layer. We can ingest our platform data, set impressions, costs, etc. CRM is a big one as well. So we'll ingest opportunity data or revenue data, from CRM or other industry specific platforms and blend it with the customer journey data to give you a full picture. So generally speaking, we have all the APIs for that. It's relatively straightforward. Just depends on the client's particular setup, but there'll be some hand holding to get that set up. But generally speaking, we've got all the kind of APIs and workarounds to do that. Marketing mix modeling slightly different, in the inputs are kind of either a daily or a weekly spend per channel, so that you've got comparative variables in terms of being able to apply them all to the same revenue set, and then it'll basically go through each day or week in time and look at the fluctuations and effectively kind of correlate where it sees spend and revenue fluctuations to allocate revenue to each channel. There's lots of other different options within that. You can have seasonality or offers or events that are affecting your sales. We can apply those things as well. So but yeah, generally speaking, it's kind of more of a rolled up aggregated data set for MMM, whereas the MTA data is much more granular and kind of basically rolled up from visitor journey data.
So would you say that the MMM side of things can be a bit more complicated and time consuming to implement, or is that a kind of simpler thing these days?
Yeah, again, it just depends on the client, really. I mean, most, if we're just tracking digital channels from an MMM perspective, we have all the APIs, we can pull those in. Yeah, most of the sort of the headaches would be if somebody's looking for some radio data from 2 years ago, but we've got the rest of it, and we're just looking for that one particular thing. So from our end, the data set is pretty simple. It's just whether or not people have captured that data at the time, really.
And I guess the big challenge with all of these things that marketers are trying to do is to prove the impact of their marketing. But in itself, there can be challenges to doing that as well. Is there anything in particular that you find businesses you work with struggle with when it comes to implementing these solutions?
Yeah, I guess the core pain points that we help to solve are kind of touched on them already, but big disconnect between online and offline. So people investing in digital advertising, but the sale is long lead cycle and the sale happens offline. So they only have form completions as something to go on. So that's obviously what we talked about earlier about combining CRM data. So that's always been our kind of bread and butter in terms of helping to solve that issue. The other big pain points we mentioned is third-party cookies have stopped those view-through conversions, the visibility of those. So our DDA and impression model is our solution around helping people to measure the impact of those top of funnel campaigns and channels. Like we mentioned, TikTok, Pinterest, LinkedIn ads, Meta, etc. But yeah, there are other sort of other smaller pain points that come out all the time. Stuff like offline events like a trade show or salespeople reaching out. People want to be able to see that in the customer journey. But yeah, I guess the sort of two core questions that we always come back to are what's working and what's not working, and what should I do next? So how should I optimize? How should I cut waste? Where should I allocate budget? And those are the sort of two core questions we're always trying to help answer. There might be a lot of very specific individual use cases below that, but it always comes back to those two things, really.
And do you have any kind of examples of sort of typical businesses that you find really benefit from implementing these solutions? Is it certain industries or certain sizes of organizations that this really favors?
Yeah, so historically, I'd say our kind of traditional customer has been a lead generation business because they'd be investing, and it could be high value as well. So it could be getting lots of leads, but only so many convert, and they have a long sales cycle. So investing in paid media to receive a bunch of form fills, only some of them turn into revenue. And obviously, some of these form fills, some of them could be telephone calls. So there'd be lots of gaps in their reporting that they wouldn't obviously be able to measure effectiveness correctly. So that's been a big problem that we always solve. So tracking calls, tracking forms, live chat, matching those back to CRM so they can see which of those campaigns and keywords were driving revenue and which weren't. Obviously so they're sort of a typical use case for us. And then more commonly now, it's more people who are advertising top of funnel. So people who are using the likes of Meta, LinkedIn, TikTok, Pinterest, so on and so forth, where those third-party cookies have switched off the view-through conversions. So that they're trying to, gain evidence that those channels are having influence or are being effective. So those are our sort of two core areas I'd say now that come up time and time again. But customer types, they could be lead gen, B2B, e-commerce, and we do have some just pure retail now. So we'll look at how media spends are driving retail sales as well.
Excellent. So it really is kind of, I guess, open to all businesses to be able to use these platforms to benchmark their performance and look further into the future as well, really.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, lead generation for sure. And then once you're into more top of funnel, if you're running, 2 or 3 different channels, you're probably going to struggle with insight if you're not using a more advanced tool than GA.
Definitely. And I think that kind of plays into a topic that I feel like I see around quite a lot, and I'm thinking about more and more myself as a digital marketer, is that kind of that switch from sort of traditional performance marketing to more general brand marketing. So I guess there's a role that both MTA and MMM can have in that as well, in terms of, if you're moving spend around, say, marketing channels, you can look to the tool to help almost prove that is working, and then also where you could scale that as well, by the sounds of what you've been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, traditionally a multi-touch attribution would over credit bottom of funnel channels that are click orientated. So your search engines and your brand search and things like that. But as you say, there's a lot of talk at the moment around that, that bottom of funnel, people have got there through upper funnel brand awareness campaigns. So if you just looked at MTA in isolation, you wouldn't see the credit that those upper funnel channels and campaigns deserve. So that's what that's all about, really. That kind of the MMM side and the impression attribution is showing you how those channels are having influence on conversions further down the funnel. And that's what we see time and time again as a use case. Really, people come to us and say, we know these campaigns are having impacts. We switch them off, we see things go quieter, but we can't put our finger on reporting that tells us that is actually happening. So I think most marketers understand that, but it's obviously it's difficult to evidence that with traditional tools.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting you say that maybe it's like the kind of old school way of understanding the value of marketing is almost when you stop doing it and you see the impact of not doing it, that people kind of have that realization of how important something may or may not have been. The other thing you mentioned there, which I thought was quite interesting, you talk about that kind of influencing along the sort of sales buying cycle. And I've seen lots of interesting kind of reports and studies in recent times where people are talking about how many touch points there are between, a prospect first knowing about your business to actually converting on your website as well. So how would kind of Ruler help me to understand that journey from start to finish?
Yeah, so in terms of how our tool actually works, our tracking tag actually tracks each individual customer's touch points and visits to your website. So within our reporting, you can actually drill in and see an individual customer's sort of profile, where you can see each of their sessions on the website and each page view. So it does give you that kind of context around how somebody came in at the top of the funnel, how they might have been nurtured by specific campaigns or remarketed, and then subsequently converted. And obviously, with those multiple touchpoint journeys, we then aggregate that data into our other reports. So the attribution models will look at those touch points and weight accordingly. We have insight reports, which will show you average positions of campaigns and how people move between different channels. So yeah, that's a big part of our solution, really, is the attribution reports basically take all your different spends and revenue and dedupe them so you're not double counting across different platforms, and give you a fair kind of return on ad spend. And then the insight reports give you that kind of context and the why behind what's actually happening and how people are behaving. The feedback we get around that is it's great for the internal storytelling and narrative, because it helps non-marketers to understand where these reports are derived from. So they can say, look, we can definitively say this many people came through Google non-brand and came back through direct and ended up converting. And that's where that number in the reports then is being built out from.
Sounds great. And I guess that comes back to, something you said before, which was about evidence and effectiveness. It's, part of, I guess, as a marketer, going back to your senior leadership in your business, part of that is here's the data that I can show you, but I think another part of it you mentioned is that storytelling as well. So understanding the touch points of some of those channels, be it paid social or be it an email campaign in the middle of a 100-step journey that a Google Analytics or and many other tracking tools it's just never gonna see and apportion any value to, is it? So being able to
Yeah.
see those insights
Yeah,
across a wider
exactly.
scale is really valuable.
Yeah, there's obviously a political aspect to any of these things really. And I think, as I say, with all these kind of new channels come, in the last 10 years, people are, potentially non-marketers are kind of used to click-based attribution. They know exactly how much spend there was and what the revenue was. And now there's, people are behaving differently. They're coming through multiple touch points and it's more difficult to measure, your social or your content. And we need to kind of maybe sort of change the narrative a little bit for you kind of C-level people to
Mm-hmm.
understand that there are multiple touch points now, and this is how it's going to be reported on in the future. Because you do hear these things like people have campaigns, or business cases turned down because it wasn't easily measured. But um, obviously, these are the kind of solutions we're kind of develop really.
And then I think one thing that'd be really interesting to pick your brains on as well is kind of any examples you can share where marketers have used rulers kind of data models etc to have a big impact in their strategy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've talked about the offline stuff, and bringing that offline revenue into the reporting. That's been a standard use case for us for years. It's just giving people a view that they wouldn't have had before. So primarily, if they're just using Google Analytics, they just had a number of goals. They wouldn't actually know what the revenue was from those campaigns. They wouldn't be able to optimize at all, really. So that's just just putting things together in a way that they wouldn't be able to. I'd say the biggest use case, the biggest impact we're having now is this impression attribution. So when you look at comparing that with last click, for instance, we'd see credit moving 95% out of last click to upper funnel channels in some cases. That'd be for more of like direct response and lead generation type customer. If they had a lot of brand awareness and existing people going to the website anyway, we're still seeing 50% of the credit moving out of the likes of direct and organic search homepage and paid search, brand paid search being reallocated to upper funnel channels. And that's based on the weightings we've got from MMM, but also the other prior touch points we've seen in conjunction with that to build out those reports. So I think that's been a big impact for people because historically, if they're just using click-based attribution, they just couldn't evidence those upper funnel channels are working, especially in light of third-party cookies being deprecated across the board.
That sounds really valuable, I think, because um, you know that may be wrong for certain businesses, but I think most businesses will probably see the greatest proportion of their leads, their sales are driven through the kind of brand, direct, paid, organic, all brand related kind of pots, which are, they're often the hardest to attribute value to or see what's impacted. So if you can show the kind of upper funnel channels that have driven that increase in brand, that's going to be incredibly valuable for people like me when I turn around and say to our CFO, I want 100k more next year to spend on YouTube ads or on TikTok or whatever that channel might be. Having that data to back me up is going to obviously give me a much better chance of getting sign off on that budget.
Yeah, exactly. And having those reports that show you that this is where those people originated from before they turn up at direct or brand paid, because obviously we know that no one kind of wakes up in the morning and just magically knows about your brand. They've learned about you somewhere along the way. So being able to evidence that is how it works in the first place. And then obviously if you take that, the YouTube example, if you've got, a saturation curve that says we think there's more room for growth in this area, and you've got a budget scenario planner that says if we spent that, extra 100k here, this is what we think the outcome would be. It's backed up by statistics to be able to
Mm-hmm.
use that to evidence your budget request really, because otherwise it kind of can often be just a bit of an iterative. We want to test this thing out, or want a bit more in this area, and those are the kind of things that obviously aren't always well received.
Definitely, yeah, and it just kind of I guess underlines the fact that data is such an important thing to what we do in marketing. Having access to more of it and more accurate data is going to back us up more, isn't it?
Yeah.
And kind of playing on that theme of data, we mentioned kind of GA4 a little bit earlier as well. Obviously, that probably has been one of the biggest shifts in the marketing landscape in recent years. Certainly, for anyone that's reporting on performance, what would your take be on kind of GA4 right now? Is how would you advise marketers to either use it or potentially look elsewhere to analyze their performance?
Obviously, yeah, it depends on client to client. Obviously, we still, we still think it's, it's a useful tool for, website behavior, traffic, trends and what have you. I think the consensus we've kind of got to with clients we speak to is that it's not fit for purpose if you're trying to measure media impact on revenue. So particularly if you've got multiple ad platforms that you run it, you're not going to get to the answer that you need from it. So, I mean, obviously you have to take it, take a view on it yourself. But I guess the acid test for me would be, you have to look at the reports and say, how closely does this, fit my business reality? So if my objective is revenue, does my revenue in Google Analytics match with, my revenue and my source of truth in CRM? Does it have my spends in from my different ad platforms? So on and so forth. So, if we go back to those two sort of key business driver questions, what's working and what's not working, what should I do next? Where should I allocate budget? Where should I optimize? Where should I cut waste? If you can answer those questions using the reports you've got, then you've probably got enough. But in our experience, if you're running multiple ad platforms and you've got different revenue sources, you're probably not going to have the full picture in Google Analytics. And that's why people come to us to help to solve those problems, really. So we wouldn't write it off. If you're just running Google Ads, Microsoft Ads, say you're not doing any top of funnel, you're doing, you've got e-commerce transaction on the website that's tracked in GA, it might be good enough. But we certainly found that, the shift to GA4 away from universal analytics and the lack of third-party cookie view-throughs on platforms has kind of been a bit of a tipping point for people to say, we need something a bit more sophisticated now.
Definitely. I'd be really interested to hear from anybody that thinks that they do get all of that insight from GA4, because I've yet to hear that from anybody. So if anyone's got any tips, I'm sure everybody would appreciate hearing that, because it'd be really valuable. The other thing you mentioned there, obviously, and we've mentioned a few times, has been cookies as well. And obviously, Google had those plans to kind of deprecate third-party cookies. They seem to have called on that, at least for now. Where do you kind of see the future of cookies, and what do you think businesses should be doing to prepare potentially for a future without them?
Yeah, so obviously we use a first-party cookie, which isn't sort of under any of these kind of threats from likes of Apple and Google. It's any things that they're blocking a third-party cookies, which effectively allows them to see if you saw an ad on Facebook, you can then track a conversion on your website, and that's what's being blocked. I say Google Chrome was going to deprecate all third-party cookies. They've said not going to do that now, but they're going to do more of a opt-in, opt-out, which is the same as what Apple did with iOS 14.5. Again, what happens to that remains to be seen. But with Apple, it was quite a kind of in-your-face kind of call to action. It says, effectively, ask this app not to track you, rather than would you like to opt out? So, rough figures, people seem to think about 80% of people are opting out, which is why there's been such a massive impact on the likes of Meta for view-through conversions. So it depends how aggressive Google are with their kind of messaging. But if it's, opt-out, we'd expect to see probably similar numbers. So, it looks like third-party cookies in the long run are going to be, they're going to be phased out. So our approach really is to have these different methodologies in place to, make the best of what's available. So multi-touch attribution for click tracking, marketing mix modeling, and other machine learning based algorithmic modeling for looking at signal, looking at impressions, and using that to fill the gaps, really. So that approach will always be, future-proofed against any cookie issues. So no cookies existed tomorrow, we could still run those models. So we're trying to, make the best of both worlds really and put those two things together. But, even if they announce there'll be no more third-party cookies as of tomorrow, you've still got a methodology there that can help you to measure your effectiveness.
Yeah, I guess the one sort of takeaway from both of those themes of GA4 and cookies is that things are changing, aren't they? And what we have available to us as marketers is maybe getting smaller in terms of some of those data sources and making our lives trickier. But I guess from your perspective, that's probably a good thing, because it means that more people like me need to turn to platforms like Ruler to be able to answer a lot of our important marketing related questions at the moment.
Yeah, I think, we've seen a shift, towards increased privacy based on some of the issues we've seen from social media platforms. I think that's only a good thing, really. And I think actually what we're able to offer in terms of measurement is better than what people had before in terms of view through impressions and GA3. But it was probably good enough that they wouldn't have explored other alternatives. Whereas, I think it's actually driving more innovation in measurement. It's just obviously been a big change for people and a bit of an education for people to understand the differences when they probably had 20 years of click-based and view-through attribution. So it's definitely a change, but I think in the long run, I think it gives you more insight, particularly for these more holistic view of attribution as well.
Excellent. I think there's been lots of great things we've covered off there around all elements of attribution, MMM, cookies, GA4. Is there anything particular that you'd kind of like to leave to the listeners and viewers to say, this is what you should be looking at implementing in your business now to set you up for the future?
I guess the most useful thing I could say is it comes back to those two questions really is, are you able to answer the question of what's working and what's not working, and what would I do next? So how would I optimize? How do I cut out waste? What should I do more of? And I just basically implore people to look at the reporting, see if they feel like they have the answers to those sort of commercial questions. And if they don't, then there's obviously, solutions like ourselves that can bring more insight.
Excellent. Well, it's been great talking to you, and I feel like there's a million more questions I could ask you about these topics, because there's so many different routes we can go down. But I think we've got a really great overview for businesses here, and in terms of what they should be considering now and in the future. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and thanks so much for all your time.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the On the Up podcast, brought to you from Moneypenny. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon.